Okay, the next session of today's symposium is on bridging science and action in community partnerships. So we're featuring 3 talks, and to moderate the session, we have Paula Torrado-Plazas, did I say it right? OEHHA's Racial Equity and Environmental Justice Manager. Paula?
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to meet you all, and it's an honor to be here and share space with you. Again, my name is Paula Torrado-Plazas, and I'm the Racial Equity and Environmental Justice Program Manager at OEHHA, started back in June. And like I said, it's great to share space to talk about this important issue of climate change and how in this snapshot of the Climate Indicators report, we've learned so much about how climate change has impacted our communities, California, and also the importance of intersectional collaborations, collective learning, mutual learning, and understanding the fact that we need diverse knowledge and perspectives to understand how solutions can be more equitable and effective. And so that leads to our next panel discussion, and really honored to share space with our keynote speakers for this panel discussion that's called Bridging Science and Actions and Community Partnerships. And for this, as an environmental justice program manager, this is a very important panel for me, as community voices are very important for research, environmental research, and they can guide not just research initiatives, but also solutions. And the importance of not only elevating, but valuing and honoring and respecting their voices as they have expertise, firsthand expertise as they live, breathe these impacts on the front lines. And the stories that and the presentations that our keynote speakers will give today will shine a light on that. And with that, I'll start with the first presenter, Ryan Meyer, Executive Director from UC Davis Center for Community and Citizen Science. He'll give a presentation on the elements of effective community partnerships. Ryan Meyer is, the Executive Director of the center at the UC Davis School of Education. His career has focused on the dynamics between science and society and on the role of science in environmental decision-making. He has studied the role of public values in our science system, boundary organizations, and co-production of science for decision-making, and public participation in research. Ryan was previously program director at the California Ocean Science Trust, a nonprofit boundary organization. He also completed his PhD at the Arizona State University. Please welcome him.
How's that? Can you hear me all right? Okay. Thank you very much for the introduction. And it's really a privilege to spend some time with this audience, both online and in the room. As Paula said, my name is Ryan Meyer. I am at the Center for Community and Citizen Science at UC Davis. And my job here is to briefly share some high-level ideas about elements of effective community partnerships in this context of bridging science and action. I'm really excited for the next couple of talks as well, sharing some what looks like some really interesting work. I imagine there might be some echoes of what I'm going to say. There may also be some differences. There may also be some reframings and whatnot, and I welcome that too. I think there's no one way to talk about this, let alone do it. And it's exciting to have that conversation. So let me see if I can advance here. So the first thing is, I think we talk about bridging, we imagine a bridge. I'm not the first person to use this metaphor, but I think we're often more on the right side here, and it's not simple. As soon as we make it a priority to bridge science and action and do it through partnerships with communities, we have to be ready for that level of complexity that comes with that. So it's challenging. But it's also amazingly fulfilling, well worth it, and if you're getting into that kind of work, it's a community of people who are working on this stuff from a lot of different angles, and so I just really recommend reaching out, finding resources, avoiding reinventing the wheel. The other thing I really encourage is thinking about a science ecosystem that goes well beyond this idea that a scientist partners with a community or some communities. If we really want this to become more normalized, more doable, we need to think about the other pieces of how science works. And so in talking through some of these elements of effective community partnerships, I think it's good to have in mind not just that we put the burden on communities and scientists to make it work together, but that science institutions themselves and science funders and other people who are traditionally involved in the use of science for environmental problem solving need to all be thinking about their role in enabling this. I think it's especially important in an audience full of folks who work in government. The next thing is that as soon as we make this a priority, all these new questions come up. And that's another reason this work is challenging. It's sometimes hard to get people into a new mindset, and then as soon as they're there, it feels difficult and complicated. So one example of that is just how we're defining communities. We don't necessarily have a community that is easily defined or one person who can speak on behalf of that community. So we need to be ready for that kind of thing, ready to check our assumptions. So from there, as a jumping off point, I want to talk about a couple of entry points into community partnerships for bridging science and action. And these are not the only two, but they're two that I think are quite prominent and that I've had some experience in. And I want to first talk about what they mean to me and then talk about what they share. So co-production over here on the left side is typically concerned with, as a starting point, how communities or other partners can use and benefit from science. And so that is something to design around. At the same time, we've got community science over here on the right, which is about how communities participate in the scientific process. And that can look a lot of different ways, but it's the notion that people who do not identify as professional scientists might have a role to play in how science works. This is a much more complicated figure than is maybe appropriate, but what we have here on the left side is a bunch of aspects of the scientific process, all, from defining a question all the way on down through collecting data to discussing results, inquiring further, disseminating conclusions. And these three columns are different modes of community and citizen science. And as you can see, they get more and more comprehensive in terms of the role of the community, but the thing that is kind of consistent throughout is this role in data collection. So another way to think about the distinction between community science and co-production is that when we add in co-production to this list, often we don't have any tick marks in those center rows. The concern starts outside of collecting data, and it's more about involving people in defining the question and developing explanations and figuring out how that's going to find use. Of course, in reality, there are not bright lines between these things. They can get mixed up in interesting and really exciting, productive ways. Let's mix up my animation here. But so I've outlined those two different ideas and some of the distinctions between them, but what I really want to focus on is the ways in which there are all sorts of values and skill sets, mindsets that are shared between co-production and community and citizen science. And a few of them are that to do them well, you need to be committed to building trust, to developing mutual understanding, to thinking about the context where your work is playing out and understanding it and perhaps engaging directly with it. And you can do that through iteration, through taking the time to show up, which often feels so hard the way we're pressured to do things that are more legible as productivity. And you need to be committed to the partnership, and that means being flexible and adaptable. We don't just establish a partnership and have it existing as a static thing. We have to be always making it, evolving it, and that requires this flexibility. Some other common features. In both these modes, we need to be thinking about power. We need to be thinking about who has a say. And related to that, engaging with and incorporating diverse forms of knowledge and expertise. And coming from academia, I can tell you there's a lot of pressure that cuts against that, sometimes in very subtle ways. Similarly, we need to design around what's actually useful. And while it's important to develop shared goals in a partnership, it's also important to understand that different people get different things out of a partnership. And you need to honor that, and that you may have a product you're working on together, but it may serve different purposes for different groups. So that raises a whole bunch of challenges. And coming back to this ecosystem approach to science and thinking not just about scientists themselves, we can list a lot of different things that these different components of the simplified ecosystem that I've laid out here. Lot of challenges for those different components. So, you know, for scientists, we need to think about new skill sets. We need to think about longer timelines for doing the work. The sort of sometimes uncomfortable feeling of sharing power with folks who are in very different settings, and the ways in which traditional academic values might push against this. Science institutions need to essentially support scientists in all of that. And that means thinking differently about career pathways, thinking differently about what constitutes scholarly productivity, and who should be seen as a scholar, both within the institution and outside of it. And then science funders, there's quite a lot of interesting work going on focused on this right now, and I'd say that there's so much funders can do, and it's not just about rhetoric and incentivization, it's also about the very process by which they're building capacity among their grantees and thinking about evaluating that work. Also, communities themselves. I think there's one of the sticky things that comes up as this kind of work becomes more common is the pressure it puts on communities to participate in science. They need to be able to say no. They need to be able to engage with this kind of work on their own terms, and they need to be able to prioritize within all of that. And so, of course, the other folks sitting in other contexts need to be able to understand that. And then the final one I'll just point out is that there already is a lot of, I'd say, I don't know, entrenched is maybe too negative a word, but we have a lot of habits in terms of how science gets used within government, within NGOs, and these well-traveled paths by which, say, a report gets produced and then gains significance in, say, a policy process. And so involving new types of partners in that is a complicating thing. And so folks who are kind of more traditional science users or more traditional targets of a scientific process need to also be thinking about what it means to have different kinds of partners with different kinds of ideas about what's useful involved. How am I doing on time? I have an example, but I don't want to take too long because I know we have plenty to cover and lots to discuss. I'm just going to give one small example from the center where I work, and this is a project called Our Forests. It's an NSF-funded partnership between the Nevada County Superintendent of Schools, the Sierra Streams Institute, which is a nonprofit in Nevada City, and of course my own group at UC Davis. And I don't have a lot of time to get into this, but the basics are that we're working with teachers to get teachers and students doing wildfire and forest health monitoring in their local communities, and working with local NGOs, with other community partners, the County Office of Education, and forest scientists in this. So there's a lot of educational value to getting students involved in real science, and of course lots of other potential value in terms of stewardship and the actual value of the data itself, and just building community capacity. So that's our goal with this project. We're about in year 4 of this. And the point I want to make here is that that's obviously a community science project, getting students doing real science. There also is a lot of co-production going on. We have to think about what the forest monitoring protocol should be, and there's a lot of different interests in that, similar with the education curriculum itself, and then the education research we are conducting to understand the learning in this context. So we talk about co-production, we talk about community science as these different entry points, but actually they can be all mixed together in a project in a really exciting way. And when we have the values that are shared across these things at the center, we can think about equity, we can think about justice, and we can think about all the different goals that these different partners might have in these communities. This is from a recent paper. I thought it was a nice way to sum up some of these things that are shared across the different entry points to community partnerships: context-based, pluralistic, goal-oriented, and interactive. I think everything I've said can be taken in a very burdensome sort of way. You can kind of think of this as, wow, this makes science so much more difficult. I do want to emphasize that when we get this right, it can be extremely fulfilling. And we have communities of colleagues who are already working in this way who can be incredible mentors and guides. So I just encourage everyone to reach out and expand the network related to that. And I'll stop there. I'm excited for the talks ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. That was great. I really appreciated how the framing of your presentation was very inviting to the challenge, stepping up to the challenge that this is a different way, transformative way of conducting science, but it's very inviting because it could be transformative and it could lead to, as you said, very effective solutions. So with that in mind, I don't know if folks on the audience have any questions for Dr. Meyer or any thoughts. So we're also inviting folks to share experiences or anything that you would like to share around how you've approached community partnerships in your research. Yes, go ahead. Yes. Oh, sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, this is Yani Jamba with CDPH. My question to Ryan is, for community, because I know it is a challenge, I worked with communities before, how do you select who speaks for the community, at least for your own project with NSF? Or some of the
for that
challenges
specific
you found?
project?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that has been a really interesting process over time. For us, the project began when the Sierra Streams Institute came to us and said, we've been doing environmental education in our community for a while. We think we'd like to build this larger program, and we'd like to partner with you in designing that and actually studying how it works. And so we were lucky to have a local partner that was leading the charge on that. And of course, the key thing there is to develop a strong sense of that partner and not only their capacities and motivations for doing the work, but their connectedness in the community. And so that takes multiple conversations. You can't just have one meeting and come away understanding all of that. And so we've been learning together. I would say that if you're, that point I made about showing up and iterative engagement is another way to understand who's speaking for the community and in what ways and where that might be breaking down. And so, you know, whether that's attending events or attending public meetings or just going around and networking with the different local nonprofits or government agencies, sometimes, you know, you need to be at that for a year or two before you really understand some of those dynamics. Thank you for the question. It's a really good one.
Any other questions?
All right. Thank you for the talk. I really appreciate it. I'm really interested in community science. You talked about the kind of the spectrum of involvement that communities might have, from just contributing all the way to co-creating, you know, the science. Can you speak a little bit to the types of projects that might fall into that spectrum? Like, what's most appropriate for co-creation versus just contributing, and maybe also thinking about the types of projects that might that Cal EPA, some of our BDOs might you know would fit in best in those. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question also. I think that in terms of those contributory projects, there is often a power imbalance between a lead scientist who might be a professional scientist and then volunteers who are contributing their time to advance that person's research. And a lot of the time, the volunteers are totally fine with that. In fact, they're actually excited about it, and that's great. I think that can have really fruitful outcomes for everybody involved. When you get into the co-creation side of things, that I think is typically associated with environmental justice type situations, although it's not exclusively focused on that, where the driving force is a problem or a priority in a community that leaders are trying to make progress on, and science is a part of that. And so the scientists need to be in the supporting role on that kind of thing. And the question of power is extremely important. And I think that it's easy for academics to lose sight of that once they get into the process of, say, designing methods, or what constitutes rigor, or what kind of data is acceptable or not. And so that's maybe diverting slightly from what your question was, but I think those are the situations where that kind of an approach is called for, and where a very careful navigation of those dynamics is needed. Yeah. Oh, yeah. All right, thank you. All right.